Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you look around your bedroom, and you suddenly realize that the last 12 years of your life, like everything you know,
Yeah.
just never happened.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's terrifying.
Right. Your spouse, the kid you raised, your completely peaceful home, none of it was real. It was just this incredibly detailed, immersive hallucination, completely fabricated by your own brain.
A total mental construct.
Exactly. And the reason your brain created this whole 12-year fantasy, it was basically to protect your conscious mind from the reality that physically your body is currently locked inside an Iron Maiden, just enduring this unimaginable, unending torture.
It is such a profoundly disorienting thought experiment, just that sudden realization that your entire emotional reality, your loves, your mundane daily routines, was nothing more than a desperate biological defense mechanism, just like keeping you from completely losing your mind.
And that absolute nightmare scenario, that is our starting point for today's deep dive. We're looking at this fascinating stack of sources, including a really comprehensive research dossier on the philosophy of suffering.
Yeah, and we're looking at that alongside the incredibly dark sci-fi universe of the book San Vitae, The Awakening.
Right, which is just such an amazing pairing. Because while the world of Santerrie is obviously totally fictional, I mean, it's got ancient covenants, energy weapons, assassins using supernatural blood abilities, the actual science and philosophy underneath what these characters go through is very real.
It really serves as a striking case study. The way their minds process extreme trauma is entirely grounded in real-world clinical psychology.
Yeah, and that's our mission today.
Yeah.
We are going to unpack how the human brain processes unimaginable pain on a neurobiological level, then how we build this psychological scaffolding to survive it, and ultimately how it philosophically transforms who we are.
I think we should probably start with the physical reality of the brain under extreme duress, right? Like the actual neurobiology of pain and survival.
Oh, absolutely. So let's look at the protagonist of the book, Kurien. His situation is just incredibly bleak. He's captured by these brutal inquisitors, and the text just lays out his torture in this visceral detail.
It's intense.
It is. He's locked inside a mechanized Iron Maiden for 12 actual years. He is repeatedly pierced by these needles designed to drain his pitch-pure Vitae, which is like the supernatural life force in his blood in this universe.
Right, the Vitae.
Yeah, and he's kept in total isolation, dehydrated to the point where his skin is literally cracking open and bleeding his own thickened Vitae. Just a complete horror show.
And physically, his body is actively consuming its own essence just to sustain basic organ function. I mean, it's a state of absolute systemic distress. But the thing is, the brain doesn't just sit there passively while the body is being destroyed.
Right, it fights back.
Exactly. It mounts this radical defense.
Yeah.
The research dossier points out that under extreme prolonged stress, the body releases massive amounts of endogenous opioids, so endorphins. And this creates a state of really profound emotional numbness, or like a deep dissociation.
And the dossier highlights something really interesting about that mechanism, which is that emotional pain and physical pain, they actually activate the exact same neural circuits.
They do, yeah.
So the brain doesn't differentiate between the source of the agony, like a broken heart and a broken bone. Both just register as massive, blaring alarm bells in the system.
Precisely. The amygdala, which acts as your brain's primary threat detection center, it just becomes completely flooded. It senses a lethal threat that just isn't stopping.
It's just redlining constantly.
Right. And when the nervous system is pushed that far past its capacity to cope, it fundamentally alters the chemical communication in your head. It actually chemically suppresses the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain.
Because logic isn't helping anymore.
Exactly. It falls back entirely on primal instinct. The brain basically realizes that if it allows conscious awareness of this unending physical destruction, the organism will experience total psychic death. So it just disconnects consciousness from physical reality.
It essentially builds a mental panic room.
That's a great way to put it.
And for Kurien, that panic room is that 12-year hallucination we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
He fully believes he escaped the Inquisitors. He thinks he's living this quiet, peaceful life with the woman he loves, Myasuchi, and a son they named Han.
He gets a whole decade of loving family life.
He does, but eventually, the physical toll in the real world becomes too great, and the hallucination just breaks. He wakes up inside the Iron Maiden. He realizes Han never even existed. The whole 12 years was a lie.
And the sheer neuro overload of that moment is staggering. Like, he manages to physically escape the vault, but his nervous system is just fully crashing.
Oh yeah, the book describes it so well. The sudden collision of his physical agony with the emotional devastation of losing a family that never existed, he violently vomits, and then he just starts heaving into this wheezing, hysterical laughter.
The brain is just trying to process an impossible amount of conflicting data all at the exact same time.
And we actually see this mechanism outside of sci-fi all the time, right? Just on a different scale. Like, this is why people who get into severe car accidents often describe feeling totally numb, or like they're floating above their own bodies.
Yes. Dissociation is a very real, very common trauma response.
So it's kind of like the brain acts almost exactly like an electrical circuit breaker. When the voltage of pain gets too high, it just trips the switch and shuts down the power to conscious reality just to keep the whole house from burning down.
That is exactly it. The surge is too great, so the system disconnects to prevent permanent structural failure. But, the crucial thing to understand about that circuit breaker is what happens in the aftermath.
When the power comes back on.
Right. The house doesn't just go back to normal. That extreme voltage fundamentally rewires the house's electrical grid. The neural pathways are literally physically altered.
Wow.
Yeah, the brain forms new, incredibly dense networks that are centered entirely around hypervigilance, threat detection, and fear.
So the body physically survives, but the mind is left inhabiting a house where the wiring is just totally unpredictable now.
Exactly.
So the circuit breaker keeps you alive in that moment of acute crisis. But how do you actually function once the power's back on? Because now we're moving from the neurobiology of pure survival to the psychology of endurance.
Which brings us to meaning-making theory. This is a core psychological framework from the research dossier. And the fundamental insight here is that humans actually have an incredible capacity to endure suffering.
But only if it means something, right?
Yes. That suffering only leads to total despair if we perceive it as random and meaningless.
Because meaningless pain is just pure destruction. I mean, the human brain is a pattern-seeking machine, and if it can't find a pattern in the pain, it just panics.
The mind instinctively seeks coherence. When an individual can construct a narrative or, find sort of meaning in their trauma, it significantly reduces the feeling of helplessness.
It gives them some control back.
Exactly. It restores an internal locus of control, a sense of agency. Because suffering completely destabilizes a person's core beliefs about the world being safe or fair. And when that shatters, a new identity has to be built from the rubble.
And it's usually built around whatever internal pieces refuse to break.
Spot on.
In Santerrie, we see this play out so vividly. I mean, Kurien survives the Iron Maiden because he frames his torture as a noble sacrifice. He convinces himself that he is enduring this unimaginable pain to protect Myasuchi.
Right, he takes the random violence being done to him and assigns it a purpose.
He reinterprets his pain as duty. And by doing that, his suffering is no longer just something happening to him. It becomes an active choice he's making for the sake of love. It's the psychological scaffolding that keeps his mind from caving in.
And there's an even more visceral example of this identity reconstruction with another character, Sharina.
Oh, Sharina's arc is wild.
It really is. When she's introduced, she awakens in the absolute ruins of a destroyed facility. She's gaunt, severely traumatized, wearing this blood-stained, tattered medical gown. I mean, everything has been taken from her.
Everything.
Yeah.
But she reconstructs her identity by just aggressively reclaiming her agency. Like, she actively chooses to stay with Kurien in this incredibly dangerous, apocalyptic wasteland.
Yeah, she refuses to be just a victim of circumstance.
There's that intense scene where she even offers herself up to a demonic hallucination, this entity named Lotus that lives inside Kurien's mind. And she does it just to prove her worth and her love.
Because she is proving her agency by choosing her own sacrifice. She's establishing that she still has power over her own fate, even if the only power she has is the choice to step directly into danger.
Okay, wait, I have a question here because I think a lot of listeners might be wondering this. Isn't there a real danger of toxic positivity with all this?
Oh, that's a very fair question.
Because we hear a lot in modern culture about finding meaning in hardship, or people saying, like, everything happens for a reason. But sometimes pain is just pain, right? Does every terrible thing have to be reframed into some beautiful life lesson?
No, absolutely not. And that is a vital distinction. The clinical research in the dossier is very clear on this. Meaning-making, especially in the context of severe trauma, is not about painting a smiley face on a wound.
Right.
It is definitely not about pretending the trauma was a good thing or that you're like glad it happened. That's a very modern, very unhealthy misinterpretation.
I mean, nobody is reflecting on 12 years in an Iron Maiden and thinking, Wow, what a great opportunity for personal growth.
Exactly. In clinical psychology, meaning-making is strictly a survival tool. It is about constructing a necessary framework to prevent complete psychic collapse. And very often that meaning is not forged in happiness or peace at all.
What is it forged in then?
Absolute rage or spite or just stubborn, sheer defiance. When Sharina reclaims her agency, she isn't doing it with a smile, she is doing it with terrifying intensity.
Yeah, she's hardcore.
She's essentially saying, you took my autonomy, so I am going to make choices so radical that you could never possibly control them. It's meaning born of resistance.
It's sort of the difference between a functional scar and a decorative tattoo. Like, the scar isn't pretty. You definitely didn't ask for it. But that dense tissue is what physically holds the wound together so you don't bleed out.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that reconstruction of this, building that dense tissue, that really leads us to the final layer of this analysis.
Right, the philosophy.
Yes. If neurobiology keeps the physical body alive, and psychology is the scaffolding that rebuilds the mind, then philosophy answers the ultimate question that comes after the dust settles, which is, who have I become now?
Because when you go through that kind of fire, you just do not come out the same person on the other side. You can't. And the Dossier outlines 3 specific, completely agnostic philosophical lenses to understand this kind of profound transformation.
Let's look at how they interact. The first lens is existentialism, drawing from thinkers like Sartre.
Okay.
The core idea here is that suffering is an unavoidable, objective part of existence, and it has no inherent grand design from the universe.
The universe is just indifferent.
Completely indifferent. Therefore, our meaning and our essence are created entirely by how we respond to that suffering. We are defined by our choices in the aftermath, not by the trauma itself.
So it's almost like a slate wiped clean by pain. Then the second lens the Dossier brings up is Stoicism. And this feels a bit more tactical.
Yeah, it's very pragmatic.
It's the idea that pain strips away all our delusions and reveals this harsh, undeniable line between what we can control, which is our internal reactions, and what we cannot control, which is literally the rest of the world.
Right. Which is incredibly difficult to actually practice when your amygdala is rewired for hypervigilance, like we talked about earlier.
Oh, I bet.
It requires forcefully recruiting your prefrontal cortex every single day to remind yourself that you only control your own mind. And that actually leads to the third lens, which is Nietzschean overcoming.
This one is intense.
It is perhaps the darkest but most transformative view. Nietzsche argued that great suffering acts as the ultimate catalyst for becoming your highest self.
Growth requires overcoming.
Exactly. It requires the destruction of the old self so that the new self can be forged.
And this maps so perfectly onto Kurien's journey. There is this incredibly powerful moment in the text after he escapes. He looks in a mirror and he literally does not recognize himself.
He's a completely different person.
Yeah, and it's not just a physical toll. He realizes that the innocent, hopeful man he was before the torture, that guy would not have survived the vault. And that man certainly cannot survive the violent world he's been thrown back into.
He has to adapt.
Right. He realizes he has to embrace what the book calls his demon aspect. He has to embrace a capacity for cold indifference and violence, because ultimately, that is the part of his psyche that kept him alive.
It's a profound existential crisis. He has to consciously accept the monster he was forced to become in order to protect whatever he has left.
There's a quote from his internal reflection in the Dossier that really captures this perfectly. He says, "If suffering is the price of becoming, then let it carve me into something new."
He is actively participating in his own transformation there. He isn't just a victim of his circumstances anymore. He is willing himself to adapt. But, we really have to look at the mechanism of that adaptation and the cost of it.
It actually makes me think of how a broken bone heals. Like when a bone fractures, the body sends calcium to the site and it calcifies. The bone heals, and at the exact site of the break, the bone is actually denser and harder than it was before.
Right, it overcompensates.
Yeah, it is much harder to break in that exact same spot. But that density comes at a cost. The bone loses some of its natural flexibility. It becomes rigid. Kurien is harder to break now, but he's lost his softness. He's lost a part of his fundamental humanity.
That captures the Nietzschean concept and its inherent tragedy perfectly. You become something unbreakable, but you lose the flexibility of innocence.
It's a heavy price.
It really is. The Dossier actually touches on how this calcification affects his relationships, particularly with Sharina. When they finally connect, They are not connecting as two whole, unblemished people.
Definitely not.
They are connecting as two survivors who recognize the rigid, calcified breaks in each other.
So it's not exactly a fairy tale romance. It's a trauma bond.
It is a trauma bond, yes, but one that they have to consciously, painstakingly work to turn into something healthy. They have to use their shared suffering as a foundation for mutual trust, rather than just spiraling into mutual destruction, which happens a lot.
They are basically taking the exact psychological cage that their abusers built to keep them helpless and turning those iron bars into weapons they can use to defend themselves.
Beautifully said.
They're taking learned helplessness and just flipping it into defiant existential rebellion.
And that is the true philosophy of becoming. It's an ongoing, active process. You don't just, heal from trauma and return to a static state. The neurobiology chemically rewires you, the psychology reframes your narrative, and the philosophy propels you forward into a completely new state of being.
We've covered a lot of really intense ground today, exploring Iron Maidens, demonic hallucinations, and blood magic. But I want to bring this all the way back down to reality, directly to you listening right now.
Because it is highly relevant.
Absolutely. Because while you are hopefully never going to be locked in a medieval torture device, the science we've unpacked today is happening inside your head right now.
The mechanisms are entirely universal. Every human brain does this.
When you go through a terrible breakup, or, you suddenly lose a career you poured your whole life into, or you experience the profound grief of losing a loved one, your brain uses the exact same biological and psychological tools that Kurien's did.
It really does.
Your amygdala fires up and floods your system with stress hormones. Your neuroplasticity kicks in to rewire your daily habits and responses. Your body might even release those endorphins to numb the initial shock of the grief.
The dissociation.
Exactly. And eventually you're forced to use meaning-making to figure out how to just survive the next day. The scale of the trauma is obviously different, but the machinery is identical.
We all have to build a new identity around whatever survives our own personal fires. Trauma, whether it's an acute physical injury or chronic emotional loss, it fundamentally destabilizes our sense of self. But human beings have this incredibly resilient, biologically hardwired capacity to reconstruct. We are designed to heal. But as we've seen, healing doesn't mean a returning to the original state. It means integrating the experience. It means calcifying the breaks and becoming someone new.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the philosophy of suffering, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We started by talking about the brain's terrifying power to create a 12-year hallucination just to protect you from pain.
A powerful defense.
And we've seen how the things that break us force our biology, our psychology, and our personal philosophies to forge a new, stronger, perhaps more rigid version of ourselves in the aftermath.
We adapt.
We do. So if our deepest identities, our greatest strengths, and our truest values are only ever truly forged in the fires of the things that break us, who would you be if you had never suffered at all?